We are live. Have this thing with punctuality. It's being an Englishman. I really like to be right on time. So here I am. I don't necessarily have anything to say, of course. No promises there. Just check my hair. Because, as it says in the show notes or what have you, I might be coming empty-headed. I didn't settle on any particular thing to talk about this week, and I just came up with the subject line at the last minute. I was going to have it something like, who am I? Or what me speak? Or something like that. Kate says there's an echo, but there's nothing I can do about that at my end. But then I settled on this subject line because it is relevant to previous meets, and it is something that I've been working out a little bit in the past week. So if I do want to get to a meaty topic, then there it is. The secret commonwealth and the space between. I think I came up with the space between because I was thinking, well, if I'm empty-headed, then what's in the space between my ears? If not thoughts or ideas. And what I decided was that it would be better to show up with nothing than show up with something that wasn't fresh. And since I didn't have that feeling of a sort of building pressure or something fermenting or something cooking that was ready to come out of the oven, or that would be ready to come out of the oven by today, since I didn't have that sense, I thought it was better not to make any promises besides the promise of showing up. And that, well, the way that it unfolded last week, including the after meet, was it felt fresher and it felt more spontaneous, which is certainly the aspiration and the goal. And that was even confirmed by the first link in the chat space that Dave Oshana, of course, I was talking about last week, and I read from his website. And then we talked a little bit more about it in the after Zoom space, including the practical purpose of my sharing the stuff about Dave, which was that, as you'll see if you click on the link, was that Dave agreed before I did the thing last week to arrange a free event if enough new people were interested, if 12 or more people would be interested in that who hadn't already had an encounter with Dave, and he would mount something. And 5 people said they were interested last week in the after meet. Actually, everybody who showed up there. Doesn't mean they will commit to it, of course, but still that seemed like a positive result. And anyway, so Dave created that echo. He wrote that thing. I didn't know he was going to do that, including linking to the video of the meet. And well, it was nice to get support from Dave in my support of him, because he doesn't always do that by any means. He's not just looking for hits or new arrivals per se, but for the right kind of results. And well, he pointed out that I seemed to be very much more in the flow than usual, and I'd say that made me more conscious and self-conscious of that, the possibility of that. And so as far as this meet was concerned, then there's a certain amount of pressure there to try and live up to a previous performance, which obviously is counterproductive. And one of the things that seemed like it could almost be a theme, or at least worth bringing up, is the desire for validation, and how if and when I get it, it increases the pressure. And I had some other validation this week, which was I heard from, well, this has actually been going on for a few weeks, but it kind of culminated this week. I did a conversation for a podcast with this chap, Sam Hyde, who's Sam Peckinpah's godson. And he'd contacted me not knowing anything about my interest in Peckinpah, but just because he was interested in my work, and he knew I wrote and spoke about movies, asking if I had anything on Sam Peckinpah. And I said, shit, yeah. I wrote a whole novel and a script. I didn't mention the script about Sam Peckinpah. So I eventually sent him the novel, which is unpublished, and he read it and he liked it. And he passed it on to his father. No, not Sam Hyde, the $1 Million Extreme guy. I'm sure there's quite a few Sam Hydes. As far as I know, it's not the same one. He's a young guy. I mean, younger than I am. 42, I think he is. And he passed it on to his father. He asked me if he could, and he said his father generally was very critical of anything that was written about Sam. So he warned his father once I'd agreed that he might hate it, or he would probably hate it. But his father apparently liked it. And this is somebody who knew Sam quite well. So that was really remarkable. It's been 13 years since I wrote that novel and just shelved it. And well, you can listen to the podcast a few weeks from now. I won't go into all the details, but suffice to say, it was a very it was very central to my life during quite a long period, several years. My soul rescue operation of Sam Peckinpah, as I eventually came to see it, which is to get inside the psyche of Peckinpah and try and represent it through fiction, through narrative. And so this was a massive kind of validation to receive, coming just from one and two people. And ditto with Dave, like it's just coming from one person, but because it's the right person about the right thing, it counts for so much more than 1,000 voices saying yay. Because it's coming from someone who knows, like Dave knows if what I'm doing to support him is good, and this guy who knew Sam Peckinpah must know if I'm getting Sam right. I mean, not 100%, I'm not saying that, but compared to people who are just totally unfamiliar with the subject matter, or relatively. Anyway, all that was just to do with the pressure of validation. Beware of what you wish for. No, David Oshana's name isn't Irish like Oshana, but I did spell it like that for a while because I thought it would be funny, but I also thought it would reduce the slightly pretentious spiritual sheen of the name Oshana, which is very out of character or inconsistent with everything else about Dave, except maybe his very white website. But even that's kind of neutral. Yes, anyway, I did think if it was Oshana, that would be much better. But no, he's not Irish leprechaun. He's East London Cockney. So that would be pretty weird. Cockney Irish. I won't even attempt that accent. Can't do Cockney, actually, really. Although I used to have a Cockney accent as a kid. And I think I got it from hanging out with another Jason at Abbott's home, the Fabian school I went to, because he was Cockney. I don't know where I got it from, but I definitely simulated a Cockney accent when I was an adolescent, because kids made fun of me for it in school, and not that they said you're pretending to be Cockney, they just mimicked my voice because it was odd. And now I wonder if I wasn't attempting to create a persona that was, rejecting my upper class origins, because that's been consistent throughout my life. Since then, I always would, even when I was rich, I would shop in thrift stores, and now I run a thrift store, and all my clothing is secondhand. Anyway, just checking on the comments here. About Irish and Scots, but I think it is slightly relevant what Oswald is typing, but certainly about the space between. He's talking about right and left brain. So the space between my ears would be the corpus callosum, the channel between the left and the right hemispheres of the brain, and that was the subject, or it was touched upon in the after event conversation meet. I never know what to call these things. It's a bit complicated, but anyway, the Zoom area, in the Zoom private area after last week's thing with Brandon Young, that subject came up. And well, I suppose it is central to this subject of what is full body articulation, which is uninhibited by the critical eye and the doubtful gaze of the ego mind, which isn't entirely synonymous with the left brain by any means. We wouldn't want to condemn a whole hemisphere of our brain to expendability. If we get rid of our egos, we're not going to get rid of the left hemisphere of the brain, nor are we going to get rid of our intellects, as somebody was suggesting at Facebook recently, quoting Rumi saying that the intellect drowns in the ocean of love, or something like that. I'm going to answer that question in a second. And much as I like Rumi, I questioned that, and it's probably lost in the translation. But this whole idea that we need to drown our intellect, or dissolve, or get rid of our intellect is a very limited idea. It's very romantic idea, and it's absurd, essentially. I mean, this chap who's quoting Rumi, and Rumi himself, using intellect to even formulate such an idea. So, and the tendency to demonize the intellect because it's the most useful tool or weapon of the ego is a bad idea. And the intellect isn't like guns, Even with guns, you say, well, guns don't kill people, people kill people. Well, no, people with guns kill people with guns. So it's definitely the combination of the two. And I would say that guns don't really have anything positive about them. The intellect is more like the sword, more traditional. I'm thinking the sword, or at least a machete, can be used for some things besides hacking limbs off people. And the intellect certainly is that. It can be used for some very positive, productive things, clearing a path through the jungle of bad ideas. And so that's a question of who's wielding it and how, or what within us is wielding the intellect. And so yeah, we wouldn't want to mistake the armor for the man. It's a very confused metaphor, because in that case it's the man you want to save, not the armor. Whereas what I'm seeing is how we can use the intellect as an armor to defend ourselves against reality, and that's a bad idea. Just going to catch up on the notes. Do I consider myself more left sphere dominant? No, I don't. Do you? No, I'm I think if I was left sphere dominant, you notice the interviews I've been doing recently about Vice Kings, I'd be a lot more proficient about pulling up the facts and the names and the dates, and I'm not. I'm quite hopeless at it. It's a point I feel I need to brush up on my own book before doing interviews. I don't retain facts and data in that way, and I don't refer to it very well. I don't actually. I function much well. Now, I mean, if there's a dominance, or if there's a side that I'm more aligned on, it would be the right brain, I think. The intuitive. Absurd, I'll accept that 90.23% of the time. What's absurd? I don't remember what I said. Last time I checked, people fight because of being enraged more than deciding it's the best solution. Last time I checked, people fight because of being enraged more than deciding it's the best. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, well, this comes back to a previous thing I discussed, which was that violence isn't necessarily, violence can be used in a way that is protective and positive. It's even in the word violent. It's an anagram for not evil. So there are uses of violence that are positive. So yeah, that would extend to fighting. Interestingly enough, that's the theme of Sam Peckinpah's life. I mean, that was one of his things he was always trying to drive home with his movies. I don't think he succeeded, because I think he was so conflicted with himself, and he certainly was a bully and used violence in very negative ways. But anyway, so the space between the harmonization of the spheres. Space between, as I talked about in the Zoom room last week, is the ratio, the logos. It's what the relationship between two seemingly irreconcilable opposites, whether it's the left and right of the brain, whether it's man and woman, whether it's God and man, whether it's infinity and the finite realm, and so on, the eternal and the temporal. These things appear to be mutually exclusive, incompatible, irreconcilable. I know it's not man and woman, but we could say at a sociological level, we do have that experience. Can't live with them, can't live without them. And certainly, the higher up we go into the abstract, the more manifest that becomes. Hence, when you have theological doctrine and even philosophical questions, and including ideological now with identity politics and stuff, the paradox becomes more and more apparent. And if we attempt to apply these truths, or to wrestle with this contradiction in a way that is just on one side of the ratio, as in the temporal spatial realm, we will always turn paradox into contradiction. See, paradox is the balance of the opposites, the marriage of heaven and hell. Contradiction is the war. And it's not a positive war. It's just an endless, futile, insane, demented war of ignorance against truth, essentially. Even though you will see it with the factions that split, you'll see ignorance fighting ignorance, but they're both fighting against truth, using each other to do so. And where was I going with this? I don't remember anymore. It was to do with the ratio, space between my ears, where I'm hoping that something beyond thought will land and emerge through articulation into meaning in a way that is meaningful, while not entirely losing the plot of things I was hoping to be able to refer to. So right now there's a dialogue going on between my right brain and my left brain. My left brain has a bunch of data points, bullet points, that it remembers as listed, that it wants to hit, not just this week or today, but throughout my life. And the right brain, on the other hand, which is not about parts but about the whole, has access to a holistic experience of reality. Amazing to think that, isn't it? And that's eternal, it's non-changing. And so but it's also always in the present. And so if it doesn't refer to the left brain at all, it'll just be silent, which wouldn't be so bad. I mean, we could have silent meets and so on. Dave does. But if it if it becomes too dependent on the left brain takes over. And the staying in the space between requires a continuous experience of surrendering to not knowing, because the left brain cannot know what the right brain is experiencing. Because if it crosses over the corpus callosum into the right brain, it's not the left brain anymore. It vanishes. Its structures all dissolve. But if it pulls over what's in the right brain into the left, then it reduces it to structure, and it's not experiencing the right brain. So it's only in the ratio, the space between. And what I wanted to talk about today, if anything, was how this dynamic, which again, the incarnation, the logos, how God becomes man. This is the reigning myth of Western civilization for a reason, not just because it's historically an event, but there's a reason it was an event, why there was an incarnation, if there was, that it is in everything, including or especially the relationships between us as human beings. So every time two human beings meet, just whether they're man or woman or not, there's a not a polarity, what's the word for this? Because it's a positive thing, dyad perhaps, a binary, in which, although this could change from moment to moment, one side of the binary is yin and the other is yang. One is positively transmitting and the other is negatively receiving. And yet, the negative pole, it seems to me, which is very curious, is, in a sense, is the active principle, because it's the negative that is drawing the transmission out of the positive as a response to it, just as a woman arouses a man in the right relationship there of the binaries. The woman appears passive, but her very passivity is what activates the man. So, and I think, well, I don't know if I think, but it has occurred to me that this may be the case with the incarnation, that it was humanity that drew God into manifestation. Like, well, anyway, no, like I say, I don't know if I can think about that, but we'll just put that, sticky note that one for now. In terms of relationships between human beings, there's a natural dynamic whereby he who has gives to he who lacks, and yet by the act of giving, maybe this is socialism in its true sense, by act of giving, he who gives that which he has to he who lacks, receives or discovers something within him that he was not aware of lacking, and that is by virtue of the one who lacked, who has something that he did not realize he had. I know it's a bit confused, but we can work on it. The samurai practices of swordsmanship and the Euro swordsmanship talked about in John Michael Greer's translation of Tybalt's Academy of the Sword are both as much about union of mental and physical proficiency. Sure, yes, the metaphor of violence and of fighting and martial arts and all that. It's a slippery slope, though, isn't it? Because we now have the culture of the American myths of regeneration through violence that are the ideological rationale and justification for CIA death cult, etc. So, amusing how the left brain intellect is used to defend ourselves from the collective consequences of the programmed left brain. Right. Not rather darkly amusing. The cycles of trauma and abuse. Neuroimaging study published in the journal Annals of Neurology found decreased serotonin synthesis in the left cortex and thalamus in 5 of 7 autistic boys studied. Yeah, well, that's filed away in my left brain for future reference, or not. Thus the value of meditation to meditate and retain life force versus expressing because it feels good. Dipole formation. Right, so all over the map today, but at least there is a consistent theme, although the element of fighting and violence is a bit obscure, like how it fits with this left brain, right brain. Certainly we can equate the left brain, as I did with the intellect, with the sword and so on. So an overemphasis or an over-reliance on one side or the other puts us in an overly active or an overly passive role, and then we have well, power abusers and trauma victims, for one thing. I mean, in its most extreme manifestation. So, I mean, one question that I have then is, and I'll get back to hopefully I'll go more into this equation that I just laid out quite clumsily about the surplus and deficit of human souls and how they complement each other. How does that work in the present situation in which I'm just talking to a computer screen? I am aware that there's 22 people out there because I've got something telling me that, data points, whatever, and comments in the chat, and past experience of a memory of how this works. So I partly know and I partly have faith that there are other people out there that are receiving this. But I don't think any of that would be sufficient, even combined with my own narcissism, my own serial exhibitionism, introverted exhibitionism. I don't think any of that would be sufficient to draw out of me something that is meaningful. Well, I know it wouldn't be. It might be sufficient to keep me talking. I guess that's the question, isn't it? It's like, if I'm just talking based on the fact that, well, I know people are out there, it's going to be on YouTube, I enjoy hearing and seeing myself talk, makes me feel good, I'll get likes, I might get some book sales, etc. If that was all there was to it, this would be a very sad and dreary affair. Doesn't mean that it would be noticeably so. There are plenty of charismatic speakers who can pull off all kinds of stunts based on a very shallow incentive. But I hope that I'm not one of them. And of course, this is one of the things I look out for in public figures, charismatic leaders who appear to be false ceremony masters, or rather I'm looking to see if they meet the characteristics of false ceremony masters who are exploiting liminality as a means to perpetuate it in order to achieve and maintain their own charismatic influence within it. And it's never, well, it's very rarely is it either or. Somebody like Jordan Peterson, it seems to me he very much started out responding to something in his own environment and having a genuine soul deep response, or at least deeper than the intellect response, and was thereby providing a meaningful communication or articulation. I'm getting a twitch below my eye now. I'm being zapped by Jordan Peterson. It was meaningful up to a point. It still is, I suppose. I've been listening to a bit of Jordan Peterson again, the Sam Harris things, but I ended up kind of wishing I hadn't, because in the end it felt like the two intellects spinning their wheels in the mud. And well, bringing it back to the room, to the present, of course, I mean, part of doing this alone with an invisible audience means that I'm mostly consciously, I'm responding to things within myself, movements, currents within my own body and my psyche that correlate with unresolved thoughts and tensions and ideas and questions that I personally have about my life, and that are continuous with past explorations or questions or explorations that I've done. So all that's happening, of course, and that could theoretically just happen with me alone in a room. I wouldn't even have to record it. It wouldn't happen though. And even if I were recording it, it would be very, very different than doing it live. First of all, because there would be no pressure, or much less pressure. There would still be some, because I'd be self-consciously aware that even though I could edit this, it would eventually be heard by people. But doing it live, of course, it absolutely is being heard almost in real time, microsecond away. Admittedly, a virtual synthesis of my voice and body, but which actually isn't the thing at all. But nonetheless, it's a very close copy, a replicant. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not going to get away with very much. I am exposed. And that was a digression. So yeah, that context that I create, or we create together, means that I am motivated or inspired to tune into what's going on internally, into what I'm trying to resolve or work through internally. And so I'm responding to that consciously. But at a deeper level, at least theoretically, what's going on in my body and psyche is influenced by the presence of you, 20 people. 2 people dropped out. The time it took to say all that. And that, as I say, that's an unconscious level, except so far as you put comments in the chat, but it's very rare that they would correspond with the moment. I mean, it takes the time to type and so on and so forth, and that's why it's difficult with the text. But even with conversation, it's difficult because 2 people can't talk at once and what have you and so forth. But it's not restricted to the language. Is the thing. There's a two-way flow. I mean, it's more than 2 if it's me and 20 people, but it's me and the 20, me and you now, because you're the bulk audience. So there's a two-way flow there. It's gone down to 18 now. I'll probably keep dropping if I keep going, which might illustrate a point that I almost made around Jordan Peterson around numbers, the reign of quantity versus quality. It's the quality that we're after. You want quality of, we both want quality of connection, and the quality of connection with the depth and the flow relates to this thing that I presented of surplus and deficit, that to the extent that by talking I'm able to tune into your collective and individually, your own needs, desires, neither word quite does it, your own deficit, your own requirements. I mean, need is really a word. We're talking about soul needs here. What's missing? Not in your lives, in your being. What parts of your being are you out of touch with, that have been frozen out, left in the cold like abandoned espionage agents, trapped in a double identity, lifetime actors in a manufactured sub-Shakespearean tragedy. Those parts are the parts that would be reaching out, not just to me, but in general. And if I can, it's not if I can, but to the extent that I'm receptive to that need, then something in my own soul will respond and come up through my awareness, and it will correspond with my own things, as I just said, and so it'll be meaningful to me, and it will be articulated, and it will arrive. It will reach your soul. That transmission will reach your soul and nourish it, and I will be nourished also on its way up. It's don't know what the metaphor would be for that, because nourishment suggests food, but I'm actually talking about bringing something out of me, which makes me think of what Jesus said. It's not what goes into a man's mouth, but what comes out of it that defiles him. And the same would be true of the opposite of defilement. What lifts us up, what transforms us. Can't think if there's a verb for this, like what gives us grace, what brings us into a state of grace, anoints us perhaps, is what comes out of us. Just going to pause there because I kind of lost my thread anyway. Nutritional deficiencies. So yeah, soul deficiencies. Although it does relate more to the body, it's like the areas of the body that aren't being nourished by the soul because the soul has been kept out, has been frozen out. Connection depends on quality of attention. Often, especially recently, I find that you and I are exploring similar esoteric concepts, collective wavelengths, similar capabilities, or merely similarly traumatized and socially engineered. So, I mean, that question raises the question of different levels of our being that are being engaged, which I think also relates to Kate's question about what is the quality of attention I need to complete openness. Because the intellect, as I say, my intellect has various points of engagement and things it wants to wrestle with and ideas, and the intellect can experience and articulate insights, but and those would relate to shared interests and whatnot in this group. But there's something deeper that's kind of complicated, but maybe not exactly complicated. But this seems to be the portion of our being that the intellect has difficulty because it's configured by trauma. I think it has difficulty gaining access to and certainly articulating, but there is a collective experience. This is the secret commonwealth. Maybe I can rescue my left brain, my intellect, by referring to that bullet point. The secret commonwealth it's not is as in it's entirely equivalent with, but it relates also to the collective soul and the invisible community that we are sharing at the deepest level of our being. We are sharing in a single experience, a shared reality of being. And that is represented, is literally true at the physical level, even though paradoxically at the physical level it seems that's the only place where it seems like it's not true, as in it's very clear that physically as bodies we are separate. We, like apples, like the whole, the mathematical basis of reality. This is what Sam Harris brings up in terms of absolute facts. There's 3 apples and you eat one, there's only 4. That's an absolute mathematical fact. And of course that depends on the agreement or the acceptance that apples are observably separate, therefore you can count them. But apples are only separate once they've fallen from the tree. What a fitting metaphor that is. The forbidden fruit, not to mention, what's his name, Newton, having his eureka. And we as human beings also, you could say we're only separate, even as physically, once we have fallen from the tree of shared humanity, once we have lost touch with the reality that we're embedded in, which includes the physical reality, which is that we're all based on or supported by the same earth, breathing the same air, under the same sun and moon, and being touched by the same atoms. We are in a shared space now, and we're connected physically by the shared space. Everyone here is physically connected. So imagine two people at a bus stop, and their boots touch, but they're both wearing big steel toe-cap army boots. They don't even notice that they're in physical contact. If they did, they might get into a fight, because one would have to accuse the other of being a homo and what you're trying to, what you're trying to do, son. But they don't even notice, because they got their army boots on. Doesn't mean they're not physically in contact. Doesn't mean that they haven't actually experienced a moment of intimacy that actually they would be embarrassed by if they noticed it. And same with this. Same with us. If we were to notice how intimately connected we are, we would be embarrassed by it. We would probably get into all kinds of fights over it. And I think we are. I think that's what's happening in the world, because the internet, the global village, is making us aware of our interconnectivity, albeit in a way that is very left brain, very language-based, image language-based. And thereby kind of intensifying the illusion of our separateness and our isolation. So, but the secret commonwealth, which is a phrase back to Ireland, that I actually can do an Irish accent, but I probably can't do one when I'm live like this, because I get ashamed of doing it. There you go. Embarrassed, pressure, all that stuff. Anyway, you don't want to see my impressions. Maybe Gib someday we'll do impressions for y'all. Secret commonwealth, Irish expression, fairy lore, the hidden order of things in nature, what the fairies were embodiments of, are embodiments of. That, oh gosh, it's well, we're part of it too. Like, the fairy represent a side of us that we have lost touch with. Hence all the magical myths and Lord of the Rings and all the fairy tales, why they have such great appeal. As I say, what we're all looking for to be nourished is to regain contact with parts of our soul that we've lost touch with, that have been frozen out. It's like Game of Thrones, the winter. The winter is coming. The winter walkers, all that. Once they get frozen out, they become zombies, and they become pretty frightening, pretty threatening to us. The fairies certainly can be threatening, and we as human beings can be threatening to each other. And one of the things that I personally feel threatened by is people's needs. And of course, I get to test this on a not daily basis, because I only work 2 days a week, but on a weekly basis at the thrift store. It's a line I'm very aware of, is that I want to serve people's needs. That's what I'm there for, and I do enjoy it. But if I feel they're too needy, I want to tell them to go away. And I'm being polite now, and because I would be polite in the thrift store, I'd say, please go away. It reminds me, actually, the man I identified as Stanley at my blog, or I renamed Stanley, so that for his privacy's sake, who I actually did say, look, I'm really not interested in hearing your stories, and if you were sensitive, you would know that. And then I got him to leave, and I said, don't come back unless you're going to buy something, because it's all about the money here. I consciously manifested the shadow that he was projecting onto me, and reinforced the idea, I'm just a stingy, money-grubbing capitalist and don't care about you or anyone else, as a ruse, whatever, to drive something home for him. Anyway, Stanley, whose real name is Raymond, the rumor is that he got thrown out of the welfare shelter, or the homeless shelter, for picking fights with so many people, and that he froze to death. And I haven't been able to confirm that. So it's only a rumor at this point, and it may be that he's just left. We haven't seen him for a while. Maybe that he's just left town because he couldn't find anywhere to sleep because nobody wanted him. But anyway, I just thought I'd mention that because I was talking about the thrift store and also being frozen. So it did seem rather on point. But yeah, so people's needs, and Stanley's needs, Raymond's needs, you see, he wasn't coming in asking for a blanket, asking for food, asking for free clothing, which itself can get annoying. But he was just coming, and he wasn't even asking actually for anything. He was just taking, and what he was taking was my time and energy. And I'm not there to give my time and energy indiscriminately any more than I'm there to give blankets and clothes indiscriminately. It all has to be measured out according to need. And my experience with Raymond was, I experienced the opposite. Like he was actually pushing me away because he was unconscious of his neediness and he wasn't acknowledging it. And it was a neurotic neediness as opposed to, an authentic need. And where was I going with this? Gosh, what was my point? It's about working in the thrift store and how I get to experience. Oh yeah, being threatened by people's needs. People's needs, of course, can actually be a literal threat. If they need the shirt off your back and they think they'll die without it, they might kill you to get that shirt or those shoes. It happens. But in much subtler ways, we probably all know, we probably all experience, if somebody's overly needy and unconscious to boot, they will resent you for having what they want and for not seeing their needs and meeting them immediately in the moment they arise, like, traumatized infants or infants, in the process of being traumatized. Anyway, with that imprint of the anguish, the trauma of not having a need met when we're infants, carrying over into their adult lives, and the smallest thing, they can become very hostile or very unpleasant if their needs are not met, and will even be hostile and unpleasant from the start, in the way that they express their needs. Now, so that's a problem, clearly. But there's as with everything, there's an authentic experience that is being concealed via the counterfeit, via the neurotic, inauthentic simulation of it. And I don't feel those are quite the right words because, of course, somebody who's traumatized, they're not consciously simulating anything, but they are being inauthentic. And it's not their fault, but it does mean that they're not going to get what they want. In order to get your needs met, you need to know what they are and be able to express them and articulate them. That's why it's very simple and straightforward in the thrift store. Somebody comes in, they're hungry, we have food, take the food. Well, it's all set up and regulated. There's a particular time and day for that, but they're cold, they need a blanket, their shoes are falling apart, they need shoes. It's all that part of it's all very basic, but there's a whole, that's the most superficial level of needs, actually: food, clothing, shelter. Underneath that, there are other worldly needs that people have that we do hear about. And then underneath that, and sometimes can help with, and then underneath that, there are the emotional and psychological needs that we also hear about, but probably can't do so much about, except listen, commiserate, sometimes give advice or, insights, or share experience that can turn into a therapeutic space. And then underneath that are the needs I'm talking about, the soul needs. Now, a soul need is so deep and profound, it will manifest through all the layers, and it can include all these other things, including a pair of shoes. Because the soul needs the body to have a pair of shoes, so the body can go about its business and do the things that the soul needs to experience to become fully embodied. So you could say our soul does need mundane stuff too. It needs for us to get those things, but only so that these deeper needs can be met. And those deeper needs are so profound and so true that they well, like a whole life can be thwarted or aborted if they're not met, number one. But number two, if they are able to express, even in muted ways, as long as they're not overly distorted, but muted ways. Like when somebody asks for a pair of shoes, they may ask in such a way that you can feel their whole soul asking, and they will receive the shoes as a gift to their being, not just to their bodies, because they've been received and heard, and the shoes are an expression of love and concern for them and their welfare. That's the soul then is also being acknowledged with the acknowledgement of their material needs. And that feels very good, not in the ego Mother Teresa sense, but in a very basic soulful sense. It feels good to be able to meet somebody in that space of need and let go of my own preconceptions or my own defenses, my own neuroses about whatever it is, that thinks that I don't want to be taken advantage of is the obvious one that we all experience when we're in any situation where somebody is expressing their need and we feel that we can help them, but is it the right thing to help them? We don't just want to be fools. Anyway, I still didn't get to the larger thing, and over here there's a whole bunch of comments coming up. So I suppose those are your needs. I suppose I better look at them. Have to go quite a ways back. There's been quite a lot. Because the impressions that can then come in are the sustenance I most need. The question is, what state can know we are all sharing this experience right now? So yeah, that's back to the collective being. That is why I mentioned the quality of attention as a means to nourishment, to the nourishment we need. Tracy says exchanging molecules, boots notwithstanding. Oh yeah, the two guys at the bus stop. Yeah, well, they're breathing the same air as well. I mean, that's the kind of intimacy we don't like to think about. That's why we don't like it if somebody farts near us. I mean, besides the obvious. Rob D says, maybe Newton chose the apple for his apocryphal origin of his eureka because of the apple religious connotation and the superstitions attached to it. Superstitions. Yeah, maybe. Have you spent much time in Ireland, Jason? No, I haven't. I did. I've been there because I had an Irish friend called John, and somehow I ended up visiting him. But it was just for a couple of weeks. Lots of people don't realize apples aren't a natural fruit. They were developed as a genus through agriculture. Johnny Appleseed. Retail is an interesting arena, mirror of energy exchange. We wander into shops with all our needs unconsciously exposed. Conversation about apples developed from cherries. There are a lot of takers out there, as we know. And there isn't, being a taker isn't necessarily a bad thing. This is what I wanted to get to partly, I think. Being a taker can definitely be a good thing. We can see this in the relationship between the sexes, that there's an erotic element to that, to the woman being passive and having to be taken, as opposed to making herself too available or being too aggressive. There is an erotic element to that. And there's a reason why, as I said, because the passivity and the need can inspire in the other, or desire in the case of sexual thing, can inspire in the other the courage and the energy and the inspiration. It can draw out the libido. It can inspire the libido. And the libido, I use it in the wider sense here of the life force, that is, well, the image of a mother's milk, actually. It's generated. It's constantly regenerating itself in order to provide sustenance to existence. We are generators of the life force, and it's not for us. It's for the whole of life. It's a shared force. And so when a surplus encounters a deficit, then the supply meets the demand, and to a certain extent, if that experience is nurtured, if it's recognized and the awareness and attention goes to it and goes with it, then demand creates supply. As in, the more we allow ourselves to interact with people in need, with souls in need, the more we will find within us that which can meet those needs, the more abundant our own experience of the life force will be. It's very, very simple. And it's also universal. I'm getting chills now. And it extends into everything. And it's a basis for, I could say, the secret commonwealth. It is the nature of interrelatedness, existence, interrelating consciousnesses, or logi, or whatever. Whether it's fairies, whether it's animals, whether it's human beings, whether it's molecules. This is how they interrelate. They exchange information, which is energy, which is life force, which is love, and thereby enhance the experience of love, increase the quality of love, deepen the quality of love that is being experienced. And so this is something anyway that I'm exploring as a model for community uncovering, again, not building. It's uncovering relationships that are already there that just aren't fully uncovered. So in the thrift store, people come in and they let us know that there are things that are not working in their lives. They're not asking for something. But we hear about all kinds of stuff. So we hear about this person or that person that can't manage to do this or that thing, that is lacking this or that resource. And sometimes they say we can help directly, but other times, and at least there's the potential for this, we know that there is somebody else who could help that person with that thing, and that other person who could help would be very happy to help. And in fact, they may be lonely people, or they may have too much time on their hands, they may be bored, or they may want to, develop their muscles a little bit, socially speaking, whatever else it is. But the most or all, I'd say all the people who've worked in our thrift store have found that their lives and their experience of themselves have developed and deepened and become richer through interacting with people in that way of being able to serve, through experiencing themselves as in a role of service. Of course, literally service, I mean very kind of mundane service, retail, but also, as I say, it can go down all the layers, all the way to the deepest thing where one soul is serving another soul's needs, and that enriches the servant's experience of their own souls, the depths of their own love. Their capacity for love increases by extending their expressions of love beyond their previous ability to express, by expressing love and concern and care and compassion in conditions where it's uncomfortable and difficult to do so, but it feels necessary. Then that deepens our capacity to love, and so therefore we move closer to heaven. Not to creating heaven on earth, but I think that could be a very real side effect. I think it would be an inevitable side effect, that if if each of us individually were increasing our capacities to love and express love by interacting with one another, this would increase the overall capacity to love, and it would therefore increase the experience of love and the expressions of love in the world, and that would gradually uncover the true fabric of existence, which is also, as I say, the secret commonwealth. Like, we can go Christian, and we've got the communion of the saints, and we've got the body of Christ, and we can go mythical, and we've got the secret commonwealth of the fairy, and the secret. I mean, Christ said his kingdom is not of this world. The fairy they're liminal. They're not quite of this world, and they're not quite in this world. And I guess they're not quite of this world either, but they definitely interface with this world. Back to the paranormal, isn't it? Like I said, I was going to start exploring the paranormal because we need to go through the paranormal to get to the spiritual dimensions, to get back to the eternal, where our home is the source of what we are. And so it's like, well, the fairy, the fallen angels, and so they're closer to us as fallen soul, as human beings, as socialized human beings, than the angels are and than God is. And there's a reason. I mean, there's a practical. It isn't just about going through that realm to get out of this realm. We're not trying to get out of the physical realm. We're trying to bridge the two, bridge the left and the right, to occupy the space between, so that we ourselves become bridges or ratios between the spiritual and the material realms. And then it is done. It is finished. And it does seem as though the way that this happens, or one of the ways in which this happens, is to extend spiritual principles into the physical, which I realize is a dangerous idea, because, well, I won't mention any names. Could mention quite a few. Mention someone like Jordan Peterson if I wanted to be fairly neutral and benign, and I don't think that what Jordan Peterson is prescribing is benign. I think it's scientism. I think it's a trap and a counterfeit. And I think, it almost always ends up that way. So I'm walking a tightrope here, because I'm not. It's like it's not about using spiritual principles to create heaven on earth. It's about rubber meeting road, that we can really truly begin to embody spiritual truths if we apply them in the physical realm. But the motive, or the desired end, isn't to transform this world into a better place, because this world is temporal anyway. So it's not really our business. Like, the world is however it is for a reason, and the way it is a manifestation of our own disconnect from our souls and our own diminished capacity to love. So the more we address the state the world is in, the more we can increase our capacity to love. And if that corresponds with a deepening awareness of our souls, and thereby the source of what we are, then our orientation shifts from the world to the eternal. So it becomes less and less about doing anything in the world, even though we become more and more immersed in the world and engaged with worldly things. We become more and more in the world as we become less and less of the world, until eventually, I suppose, we wouldn't even see the world as the world. So it's a very paradoxical, because if we were to see the world with these eyes, it seems as though, in a certain sense, we would see the world as eternal and therefore perfect. not eternally damned, but never fallen. And that all of this trauma is kind of floating flotsam. Is that the word? Flotsam? It's like it's mind stuff. It's sticky mind stuff. The slime of the thing I don't particularly want to name, because then it becomes mind stuff as well. The body knows how to process trauma, and the body knows how to process the mind and flush it out, the false mind I'm talking about here. The body can flush it out like it can flush out an implant. Even those diabolical high-tech implants that Whitley has in his ear, he doesn't want to get rid of it because they're quasi-organic. And I don't know, I'm not going to cast judgment on stuff I don't know about. It's just a metaphor anyway. And the world itself is just a metaphor insofar as it's a temporal expression of something that's eternal. Is there an eternal world? And if so, does it have a physical dimension? Because that would seem to be a contradiction. If something is physical, it can't be eternal. And yet, it could also be the opposite, that if the eternal is all that there is by definition, because everything else dies, then the physical world itself must be eternal, because otherwise it wouldn't be here. And that's the paradox. We can only really reconcile it by saying something like, oh, well, time is an illusion and it's all happening simultaneously, but we just flatten it out as the right brain transmits its experience to the left brain, or as the soul experiences itself physically, and the mind as an organ of the soul, the intellect, translates the synesthetic simultaneous experience of the eternal and the infinite into a narrative. It has to flatten it out into a sequential narrative that has a beginning, a middle, and an end: birth, life, death. With Christ's case, however, it's birth, death, resurrection. And that's all life. All of it. Even death is life when there's a resurrection. So, I'm going to end on that. It's quite a positive note. I think I managed to free roll today. I was a bit sticky at the beginning. There's only been a few comments, so I'll catch up on them before I sign out. Love before will. Yeah, will is an expression of love, just as intellect is an expression of the soul, or an instrument of the soul. How to submit or give up all things that block out the higher and the deeper. Don't forget the deeper. The key is recognizing we have all we need. Everything else is justifying criminal supremacist thinking. Every point within the whole is as vital as the next. Everything must go according to a natural homeostasis balance. Seeing the world through spiritual eyes shows us our place and purpose in it, the big picture. Some say we live in a holographic universe. They do. Kate says, thank you, Jason. That was great. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to put the Zoom link in. And as always, for those who don't know the routine, go over to Zoom in a couple of minutes. And I'll hit enter in a second. Don't want people to go over just yet because I'm not there. Ask for sobriety, or at least as sober as you can make it. and no smoking at the event. I do record the events, but I usually only share highlights, and I don't share anything if anyone doesn't want to be made public, so it is a private space. I do ask for donations, as you know, for this event or in general, which I'm currently doing for free. So if you'd like me to carry on doing these, then please say it with a smile. I wanted to make that actually an accurate statement, but you know what I mean. This is going to be the last one for a while because I'm hitting the road next week. It doesn't mean I might do an impromptu, spontaneous something along the way, but I'm going to Europe, I'm going to London and then to Finland for a Devashana retreat. And so I'll definitely be offline for some of that, and the rest of it I'll be sporadically online. There'll still be the podcast, won't be any blog posts probably, and I probably won't be doing this. But as I say, if I find an opportunity, I might do it. So keep an eye out. Anyway, subscribe to the YouTube if you want notifications. And I also like to ask anyone who's bought and read Vice of Kings, well, thank you. If you could review it at Amazon, unless you didn't like it, then you don't have to. That would be great. There's only 3 reviews. So, and if you haven't bought Vice of Kings or Prisoner of Infinity or Seen and Not Seen, please do so. They're very good books. Shouldn't say that, should I? But I think you'll find something of worth in there, and that's probably the best way to support a writer, is buy his bloody books. 111. Okay, so off I go again. Thanks everyone for tuning in on this. Like I said, if you want to come over to Zoom, I will now put the link in, and I will be there in a couple of minutes.